After Donald J. Trump, few names agitate the passions of people quite like that of Robert F. Kennedy Jr., especially since he has assumed the post of Secretary of Health and Human Services in the Trump administration. This man is just a single generation removed from some of the most storied and celebrated political figures in modern American history. So what is it about him that fuels unbridled fury in so many people? And are they justified in feeling the way they do?
Pablo el Molinero, the honest reportero, gonna get your story straight on this crazy vaquero.
On April 19, 2023, Robert Francis Kennedy Jr. announced that he would seek the Democratic Party's nomination for President of the United States of America. Some 16 months later, on August 23, 2024, Kennedy abandoned his presidential aspirations and endorsed Donald J. Trump. That was quite a turnaround for a person whose family name has been practically synonymous with liberal Democratic Party ideals since the election of his uncle, John F. Kennedy, to Congress in 1947. He gained widespread acclaim as an environmental lawyer with the Riverkeeper organization. The efforts of that organization included suing companies and municipalities along the Hudson River, which forced them to stop discharging waste into that waterway and to clean up any previous damage that they were responsible for. Kennedy's work on the project set long-term legal standards for dealing with the environmental impact on America's rivers and lakes. Another highlight in his career came in 2017 when Kennedy sued the Monsanto Corporation over the dangers of their product Roundup, a glyphosate-based herbicide said to be linked to a higher incidence of Hodgkin's lymphoma. As long as Kennedy stayed within the confines of his litigation against chemical and petroleum corporations, along with other polluters, no one on the left had any problem with what he said or thought. But once he challenged the pharmaceutical companies and the government over vaccine policies, whoa, watch out, Nelly. The first time I ever listened to Robert Kennedy talk about the subject was on an episode of Megyn Kelly's podcast from March of 2022. Fanboy! I already had my doubts about the government's COVID policy because of things I had heard from other experts who were skeptical of the official approach to the pandemic. They were especially unconvinced about the efficacy and usefulness of the COVID vaccine for the general population. In the end, many of the assertions that I heard from these other scientists apparently turned out to be true, like the claim that the naturally developed immunity that one gets after having recovered from the disease was far superior to what you would get from the jab itself. The fact that many of those same assertions were suppressed or censored on social media just gave someone like me even more reason to doubt any official viewpoint. Anyway, in that episode, Kennedy describes when and how, as an environmental lawyer, he became entangled in the subject of vaccines. Then he goes on to talk about methyl mercury, ethyl mercury, and thimerosal and other things that I am 100% unqualified to talk about. That is also when I heard him say this.
Well, I have never been anti-vaccine. That is a pejorative that's applied to me in order to marginalize me and silence me. And as you point out, have people dismiss me as somebody who's irrational or crazy. What I've said is we should have safe vaccines.
That really struck a nerve in me because all I had ever heard about him was that he was a rabid anti-vaxxer, and there he was saying that he had never been against vaccines. The tone that I heard some people use to discredit Kennedy sounded an awful lot like that which I had heard in other contexts. Racist fascist. It was a mantra, something repeated so often that among the faithful there was no doubt as to its veracity. It's kind of like something called the Mandela effect, when you think you remember something vividly that didn't really happen. Did Darth Vader actually say, "Luke, I am your father"? Or was it something else? And once Kennedy endorsed Trump for the 2024 presidential election, well, his affiliation with the Third Reich became unquestionable. He was Joseph Mengele without a medical degree. So, what has he said about vaccines and about the health of Americans in general that would cause such vitriol? I could try to explain all the details of his arguments, but it would be kind of pointless since I can't reasonably claim to understand it well enough to defend any of it. And to be honest, in my research for this piece, I found some of his claims to be hyperbolic and some of his solutions seemed impractical to me. For example, Kennedy's claim that by the time someone reaches 18 years of age, they will have received 72 vaccines is debatable. debatable. As I understand it, that number may include various doses of the same vaccine and a yearly flu shot, which I have never had. But its larger point is true. No vaccine, no medicine for that matter, is 100% safe. It is an impossible standard to meet, and people should be aware of the potential risks of any kind of medication. And the number of vaccine injuries associated with the COVID shot was much higher than early reports would suggest. In fact, initial reports of any injuries at all related to the coronavirus vaccine were completely suppressed. The word from the top was, you had to get the jab or grandma was going to die. The best and most comprehensive synopsis that I heard of Kennedy's ideas was from an interview he did with Joe Rogan in June of 2023. It's episode 1999, and it's available on YouTube. I would strongly recommend that you listen to the first hour, especially if you have young children or are thinking of starting or expanding a family. I am serious. 1 hour. Totally worth your time. After the 1 hour, you might even decide that you want to hear the whole 3 hours. At any rate, I will leave a link in the description. And if you have that much time to listen to a podcast, then please take 1 minute to like this video and subscribe to the Pablo El Molinero channel on YouTube. If you smash that bell, well, that's the best vaccine there is to make sure that you will be notified anytime we have new content available on the channel. Thank you for watching. Another pretty evident observation is that Americans spend far more on healthcare per capita than in any other country in the world, and yet suffer worse results year after year for that investment. In 2024, that came to almost $15,000 for each man, woman, and child in the country, compared to a little under $10,000 for countries like Switzerland and Germany. In other words, the healthcare system in the United States has failed its citizens. I don't see how else you can look at it. It's enough for a casual observer like myself to wonder why we don't scrap the whole system entirely. Of course, that is not RFK Jr.'s plan, but he does want to do a deep dive into several issues, including the poor quality of Americans' diet, the prevalence of dangerous additives and pesticides in our food, the over-medication of all Americans, the incestuous relationship between the medical and pharmaceutical industries with our healthcare authorities, and yes, the value and safety of certain vaccines that are mandated for our children. I want you to listen to this exchange between actor Cheryl Hines, who is Robert Kennedy's wife, and Sunny Hostin, co-host on The View, which is an American daytime TV show. In this clip, Ms. Hostin says very respectfully that Ms. Hines' husband is basically just a completely unqualified snake oil. Just listen.
The problem, respectfully, is that your husband is the least qualified Department of Health and Human Services head that we've had in history. I think that's a very dangerous, has also spread a lot of misinformation, a lot of chaos, a lot of confusion. And I think it's just a very dangerous thing.
Ms. Hines handled herself very well in responding to the deranged Ms. Hostin. But this kind of stupidity is exactly what I'm talking about. Least qualified HHS secretary in our history? Kennedy has been involved in dozens of cases against the chemical and pharmaceutical industries. Because of his involvement in so much litigation, he has amassed an encyclopedic knowledge from hundreds of different studies on the subject of toxic chemicals and vaccines. It's a basic tool of the trade for any effective lawyer. He can't just sashay into a courtroom without the intense knowledge needed to litigate such high-dollar and high-profile cases. I would instead ask, who was more knowledgeable about the issues of healthcare in the United States than Robert Kennedy? This has turned out to be his mission in life. I can't think of any other person in the job as HHS secretary with comparable knowledge of the studies that have been done. Javier Becerra? No, he's a smart guy and a talented politician in his own right, but he had no particular abilities that made him uniquely capable for the position of HHS secretary. In fact, given the criteria that Biden used for his official appointments, many have argued that he named Becerra to the position because he needed a person with a Latino name to meet the quotas that the Democratic Party seemed to demand throughout government. So, what are they really saying? They're saying that medical orthodoxy cannot be challenged. Just like with other issues like climate change, the mantra of the left became believe the science. They consider their conclusions to have been so clearly established, they even refer to it as settled science. Then they circle the meat wagon so that no one can bust up their little hoedown. Listen, the moment that science becomes settled is the moment that it stops being science. At that point, science becomes dogma. This is a pattern that can be seen throughout many disciplines of academia. I don't want to get too far off the topic, but until late last century, it was an unchallengeable truth that the pyramids and the Sphinx at Giza in Egypt were the oldest large structures in the world, dating back to 4,500 years ago. Among mainstream archaeologists, this fact was not up for discussion. That is until the discovery of the ruins at Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey, which in the final years of the 20th century were finally determined to predate the site at Giza by more than 6,000 years. Just saying. Anyway, back to the subject at hand. There is a renowned vaccine scientist, Dr. Peter Hotez, from the Baylor School of Medicine in Houston, Texas, who was the media darling of the anti-vax movement. He even went on Joe Rogan's podcast to refute the claims of the likes of Robert Kennedy. Later, Rogan proposed that Dr. Hotez debate Kennedy live on his show and offered $2 million to the charity of Dr. Hotez's choice for doing so. Not Kennedy's favorite charity, it was all for Dr. Hotez. As interest in the event heated up, Dr. Hotez, who once had actually been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize, went on a number of other shows to get confirmation that it really wouldn't be constructive to engage someone like that shyster ambulance chaser Kennedy. What would be the point? Well, I would think that debating someone as ill-informed as Robert Kennedy should be a piece of pumpkin pie for such an illustrious expert in the field of vaccinology. The point would be 2 million smackers, and as one of the leading experts in the field of tropical disease, I would think that the good Dr. Hotez could locate some organization somewhere in the tropical world that could make use of $2 million. Look, I'm not suggesting that the man chickened out when confronted with the challenge of a debate with Robert Kennedy. No, I'm saying it outright. The man chickened out. Now, listen to this excerpt of Kennedy on the Joe Rogan Show from June 2023.
But the fact that no one will debate you speaks volumes, especially now. They can't say now that you're not popular. And what's crazy is that Biden now has decided he's not even going to debate anybody in the primary. Or,
I'll just tell you one story. The Connecticut State Legislature had a bill to end the religious exemptions for childhood vaccines in Connecticut, and the head of the Democratic Party in the legislature asked me to come out and debate a Yale professor in front of the legislature, and I said, great. I'm from the Yale Medical School. And he called back and said, there's going to be 2 of them, and it's against you, and they're going to get 2/3 of the time, and you get 1/3. And I said, fine. And then he called back and said, there's going to be 4 of them, and you each get 6 minutes. And I said, that's all I need. And it's not fair, but it's all I need. And so I fly out on a red eye. I get to the State House, and it's me and 4 empty chairs. Somebody told them, or they all decided, I don't know, not to show up. And that's happened to me again and again and again and again. I agree to debates, and it seems like somebody gets a message, but, who knows? It's obscure. But nobody in 18 years has been willing to debate me.
Really? Not one debate in all that time? No, not unless you want to count those sessions with the howler monkeys that we elect to represent us in Washington. Actually, I question who they really represent anyway, because they sure seem to always be in favor of the status quo, which in this context means the healthcare and pharmaceutical industries. I think it's interesting that if you look up Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and his opinions about vaccines, most sources, including Wikipedia and even AI sources, will say that his theories have been discredited or are misinformation. They also describe him as an anti-vaxxer, even though you just heard him say that he has never been one. And when asked what actually does cause autism, the experts generally say that it's most likely a combination of environmental factors that science is busy looking into. By the way, that is exactly what RFK says too. And since they don't know what does cause autism, I find it difficult to simply take their word for it when they say they know what doesn't cause it. It's not as if there is no history of misinformation coming from our official medical authorities. Look up the swine flu vaccine scandal from 1976. Look up the Vioxx and OxyContin scandals. Even though I am uniquely unqualified to voice my opinion, I won't let that stop me from voicing embracing it anyway. I believe this situation has come about due to a combination of certain environmental factors. These include stupid government, corrupt financial interests coming from big pharma, and the typical intellectual hubris that emanates from our healthcare institutions. Add to that the hatred for Donald Trump and anyone associated with his administration, and we all have an illness for which there is no vaccine. This is Pablo El Molinero.